The sun was barely lifting itself over the wide, empty plains of Kentucky when Caleb Stone turned his horse toward the narrow dirt road that led to his ranch. Morning was usually quiet at that hour, peaceful enough that he could hear the wind brushing through the tall grass and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. The Appalachian Mountains rose like sleeping giants in the distance, their peaks still touched with the last remnants of winter snow despite spring having claimed the valleys below. But that morning, something felt wrong. Caleb had learned to trust his instincts during his 41 years on this earth. They had kept him alive through harsh winters, through the grief of losing his wife Margaret and their daughter Emma 6 years prior, through the loneliness that had become his constant companion. His instincts were telling him now that the day ahead would change everything, though he could not yet know how. His horse, a sturdy mare named Copper, slowed as they approached the old wooden mailbox at the edge of his property. The animal snorted nervously, her ears flicking back and forth. Caleb followed her gaze and felt his chest tighten with a sensation he could not immediately name. It was somewhere between anger and horror, between disbelief and rage. A small figure was tied to the mailbox post. At first his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Perhaps it was a bundle of rags left behind as some cruel prank. Perhaps it was a scarecrow that had blown over in the night wind. But then the figure shifted, just slightly, and a soft, broken sound escaped from it, a sound that was unmistakably human. Caleb dismounted at once, his boots hitting the ground with a thud that seemed too loud in the morning stillness. He rushed forward, his heart pounding in his chest with a violence that surprised him. It had been years since he had felt this kind of urgency, this desperate need to act. A young woman, barely more than a girl, was bound tightly to the mailbox with rough rope that bit into her wrists and shoulders. Her skin was the color of honey touched by sun, marking her as Apache. Her legs were thin and twisted beneath her, lying at angles that suggested they could not move, could not obey the commands her mind might give them. Dried blood stained the hem of her simple dress, and dust covered her face and long black hair that hung in tangled strands around her shoulders. Someone had made sure she could not stand, could not escape, could not even fall properly. They had positioned her like a piece of discarded furniture, like something without value or worth. Her eyes met his as he approached. They were the color of amber in firelight, striking against her brown skin, and they were filled with a fear so profound it made Caleb's hands tremble as he reached for his knife. But beneath the fear, there was something worse. Resignation, acceptance, as if she had already decided that whatever would come next, she deserved it, as if she had been taught that she was not worthy of rescue or kindness or hope. Pinned to her chest with a rusty nail was a folded scrap of paper. Caleb pulled it free with shaking fingers and read the words scrawled in careless ink that spoke of whiskey and malice, and the kind of cruelty that men inflict when they have convinced themselves that some lives matter less than others. The note read, "A gift for the hermit. Keep her, or let the wolves do. Your choice." Caleb's hands trembled as anger surged through him like wildfire through dry brush. This was not humor. This was not ignorance. This was deliberate cruelty designed to humiliate a helpless young woman and remind her that she had no worth in the eyes of those men. It was meant to break whatever spirit she had left. He looked around the empty road, half expecting laughter to erupt from behind the hills or the sound of horses retreating in the distance. There was only silence. The kind of silence that settles over the world when something terrible has happened and nature itself seems to hold its breath. Caleb crouched beside the girl and spoke gently, though his voice was tight with the effort of controlling his rage. "You are safe now," he said. "I will not hurt you." He did not know if she understood the words. Her eyes suggested she had heard many promises broken before, but she understood the tone. He could see it in the way her breathing eased just a little, in the way the rigid tension in her thin shoulders softened by the smallest degree. He cut the ropes carefully, afraid of hurting her more than she already was. The knife was sharp, honed on the whetstone he kept by his fireplace, and it sliced through the fibers with ease. When the last knot fell away, her body sagged forward as if the ropes had been the only thing holding her upright. Caleb caught her, lifting her with surprising tenderness for a man whose hands were calloused from years of labor, whose arms were thick with muscle earned through chopping wood and mending fences and doing all the work that a mountain ranch demanded. She was impossibly light in his arms. Too light. He could feel her ribs through the thin fabric of her dress. She clung weakly to his coat, her fingers barely able to grip the worn leather, as if letting go might mean being tied again, being abandoned again, being left for the wolves. As he carried her toward his horse, the morning sun rose fully behind them, casting long shadows across the land. The mountains seemed to watch with ancient patience. Copper stamped her feet, but did not shy away as Caleb carefully settled the girl across the saddle before mounting behind her. Caleb did not know her name. He did not know her story, beyond what the evidence of rope burns and starvation and those lifeless legs told him. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty, a conviction that settled into his bones with the weight of an unbreakable vow. Whatever had been done to her at that mailbox would not be the end of her story. The ride back to his cabin took 20 minutes. The girl did not speak. She barely moved, except to breathe and to occasionally flinch when Copper's gait jostled her. Caleb kept one arm wrapped securely around her, holding her steady, trying to provide what comfort his presence could offer to someone who had clearly learned that men brought pain rather than protection. His cabin sat on a gentle slope of the mountain, surrounded by pine trees that whispered in the wind like gossips sharing secrets. It was a simple structure, built from timber he had cut himself, with a stone chimney that he had mortared with his own hands. Inside were 2 rooms, a main living area with a fireplace and kitchen, and a small bedroom where he slept alone in a bed that had once held 2. Caleb dismounted and lifted the girl down with care, carrying her inside and placing her on his own bed. She made a small sound, something between protest and surrender, but she was too weak to resist. He covered her with a heavy quilt that Margaret had sewn years ago, one that still carried the faint scent of lavender from the sachets his wife had tucked into every chest and drawer. The girl's eyes followed him as he moved around the cabin, stoking the fire in the hearth until flames leaped and crackled, heating water in a kettle, gathering clean cloths, and the herbs his mother had taught him to use for wounds and fever. He was not a doctor, but he had learned through necessity. Living alone in the mountains meant being your own physician, your own carpenter, your own everything. He returned to the bedside with a bowl of warm water and the cleanest cloth he owned. The girl watched him approach with those amber eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. When he reached toward her arm, she flinched violently, a sharp intake of breath that spoke of previous pain, of trust broken so many times that even kindness felt like a threat. "I need to clean the wounds," Caleb said softly. He made sure she could see the cloth, could see that his hands held nothing sharp or threatening. "I will be gentle. I promise." She did not speak, but after a long moment she gave the smallest nod. Permission granted, or perhaps simply acceptance that resistance was futile. Caleb worked carefully, washing away the dirt and dried blood from the rope burns on her wrists. The wounds were angry and red, showing signs of infection beginning to take hold. He had seen wounds like this before, on animals caught in traps, on men who had been bound and beaten. They spoke of hours spent tied, of struggling against restraints that only grew tighter with movement. As he cleaned and wrapped each wrist with strips of cloth soaked in a tincture of comfrey and yarrow, he spoke to her in low, steady tones, not expecting answers, but hoping the sound of a calm voice might ease some of the terror he could see lurking behind her eyes. "My name is Caleb," he said. "Caleb Stone. This is my home. No one will hurt you here." The girl watched him, but said nothing. Caleb wondered if she spoke English at all, or if her silence was simply the silence of someone who had learned that words were dangerous things, that speaking invited punishment. When he had finished tending to her wounds as best he could, he brought her water in a tin cup and a small piece of bread that he had baked the previous day. She took the water gratefully, drinking in small sips that suggested her throat was raw. The bread she ate slowly, as if afraid it might be taken away, or as if her stomach had forgotten how to process food. Caleb pulled a chair close to the bed, but not too close. He sat down with a heaviness that spoke of exhaustion that went beyond the physical. For 6 years he had lived in this cabin alone, speaking to no one but himself and occasionally to Copper when the silence became too oppressive. He had told himself he preferred it this way, that solitude was a choice rather than a punishment. But looking at this young woman in his bed, this stranger who had been left for dead like unwanted cargo, Caleb felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been frozen and locked away since the day he had buried his wife and daughter in the small cemetery near the church in Pine Ridge. The girl finished the bread and water. Her eyelids grew heavy. Caleb could see her fighting sleep, fighting the vulnerability that unconsciousness would bring. But eventually, exhaustion won. Her eyes closed, and her breathing deepened into the rhythm of someone who had not truly slept in a very long time. Caleb remained in the chair, watching over her as the morning light grew stronger and filled the cabin with golden warmth. He thought about the note, about the cruelty it represented. He thought about the men who had done this, who had laughed while tying a helpless girl to a post like she was a joke, a prank, a piece of entertainment for their drunken amusement. And he thought about Margaret and Emma, about the diphtheria that had taken them both within 3 days, about how helpless he had felt watching them slip away despite everything he tried. The doctor had arrived too late, held back by a snowstorm that had closed the mountain passes. Caleb had held them both as they died, had felt their hands grow cold in his, had heard their final breaths rattle in their chests. Margaret's brother Huang Dalton had blamed him, had screamed accusations through tears and whiskey, saying Caleb should have gone for the doctor sooner, should have paid for better medicine, should have done more. The words had landed like physical blows, each one finding its mark because they echoed the guilt Caleb already carried. He had not seen Dalton in years. The younger man had moved to Pine Ridge and fallen in with a rough crowd, men who traded in whiskey and violence, and things that decent people did not speak of in polite company. Caleb had heard rumors but had kept to himself, had let the past remain the past, until now. Because Caleb recognized the handwriting on that note. He had seen it before, on letters Margaret used to receive from her brother before she died. Sharp, angular letters that leaned too far to the right, that pressed too hard into the paper. Dalton had done this, or at the very least, Dalton had been part of it. The realization settled over Caleb like a cold rain. This was not just cruelty. This was revenge. This was Dalton's way of hurting him, of making him feel the pain of responsibility for someone vulnerable, of putting him in a position where he would either have to abandon this girl to her fate or take on the burden of caring for her. But Dalton had miscalculated. He had assumed Caleb would see the girl as a burden, as an unwanted complication in his solitary life. He had not understood that Caleb had been waiting for 6 years to feel something other than guilt and grief. He had not realized that sometimes the person who needs saving is not the one who appears most helpless. The girl slept through the morning and into the afternoon. Caleb checked on her periodically, making sure she was still breathing, still safe. He prepared a thin broth from beef and vegetables, something gentle enough for a stomach that had known too much hunger. When she woke, he would feed her, and then he would begin the work of helping her heal. It was evening when her eyes opened again. The cabin was dim, lit only by the fireplace and a single oil lamp on the table. Caleb was sitting in his chair, mending a harness with needle and thick thread, when he felt her gaze upon him. He set aside his work and approached the bed slowly, giving her time to become aware of her surroundings, to remember where she was. Her eyes were clearer now, no longer clouded with the fog of exhaustion and despair. They tracked his movement with an intelligence that had not been evident before. "You are on my ranch," Caleb said gently. "In the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky. You are safe here. No one will hurt you." The girl studied him for a long moment. Then, in a voice that was rough from disuse and pain, she spoke her first words to him. Words in English, heavily accented but clear enough. "Why?" she asked simply. It was perhaps the most profound question she could have chosen. Why had he helped her? Why had he brought her to his home? Why had he not simply left her there or turned her over to the authorities in town, who would likely have done nothing? Caleb sat down in his chair, far enough away that she would not feel crowded. He thought about how to answer. He could tell her about Margaret and Emma. He could tell her about the guilt he carried. He could tell her about the 6 years of loneliness that had taught him the value of simple human kindness. Instead, he said the only truth that mattered. Because no one deserves to be treated like that. Because you are a human being, and you deserve to be rescued. The girl's eyes shimmered with tears that did not fall. She nodded, just once, a gesture so small it might have been missed if Caleb had not been watching closely. "My name," she said slowly, as if testing whether the words would bring punishment, "is Kiona." Caleb felt something ease in his chest. A name. She had given him her name. It was a gift, he understood. A sign of trust, however fragile. "Kiona," he repeated, letting the syllables settle on his tongue. "It is beautiful." "What does it mean?" "Brown hills," she whispered. "In my language. My mother chose it." Caleb smiled, the first genuine smile he had felt on his face in longer than he could remember. "It suits you. And it suits this place. Look." He gestured toward the window, where the last light of day painted the mountains in shades of brown and gold, where the rolling hills seemed to stretch endlessly toward a horizon that promised both challenge and possibility. Kiona looked, and something in her expression softened. For just a moment the fear receded, replaced by something that might have been wonder or recognition, or perhaps the first glimmer of hope that she might find a place in this world after all. Caleb brought her the broth and helped her sit up enough to drink it. She took the bowl in hands that shook but managed to lift the liquid to her lips. The broth was warm and nourishing, and Caleb could see color beginning to return to her cheeks as she drank. When she had finished, she looked at him with those amber eyes and asked another question. "How long?" she said. "How long what?" Caleb replied gently. "How long until they come for me?" The question struck Caleb like a physical blow. She knew. Of course she knew. She understood that the men who had left her at that mailbox would not simply forget about her. They would come back, either to reclaim what they considered their property or to eliminate the evidence of their crime. "I do not know," Caleb admitted. "But when they come, they will not take you. I promise you that." Kiona studied him with an intensity that made him feel as though she could see straight through to his soul, could measure the truth of his words against whatever experiences had taught her that promises were made to be broken. Finally she spoke again. "Your promise," she said. "Worth what?" Caleb met her gaze steadily. "Everything," he said simply. "My word is all I have, and I give it to you now. You will not go back to those men." Kiona was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded and closed her eyes, allowing sleep to claim her once more. But before she drifted off, Caleb heard her whisper 2 words that carried the weight of something precious and fragile being carefully offered. "Thank you." The next morning brought complications. Caleb woke to the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Multiple horses moving at a steady pace that suggested purpose rather than leisure. He rose quickly from the chair where he had spent the night keeping watch over Kiona and went to the window. 5 riders were approaching up the mountain road. Even from a distance, Caleb recognized the figure leading them. Huang Dalton sat his horse with the careless confidence of someone who believed the world owed him something, his blonde hair catching the morning light, his posture speaking of whiskey and arrogance. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. So it would be today, then. The confrontation he had known was coming had arrived sooner than expected. He checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded, and positioned it near the door where he could reach it quickly if needed. Then he stepped outside onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind him. Whatever happened next, Kiona would not see it. She had witnessed enough violence. Dalton and his men stopped their horses in front of the cabin. The other riders were rough-looking men, the kind who made their living in ways that did not bear close examination. They wore expressions that suggested they found the whole situation amusing. Dalton dismounted with theatrical slowness, making a show of looking around the property as if appraising its value. He held a bottle of whiskey in one hand, though it was barely past dawn. His eyes, when they finally settled on Caleb, were bloodshot and bitter. "Well now," Dalton said, his voice carrying the false cheer of someone working hard to maintain a facade. "If it is not Caleb Stone, or do you still use McGregor sometimes? I forget which name you prefer these days." Caleb said nothing. He stood on his porch with his arms crossed, presenting a wall of silence that he knew would irritate Dalton more than any words could. Dalton took a long drink from his bottle and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Heard you found something of mine. A little piece of property that went missing. Figured I would come collect it." "She is not property," Caleb said quietly. "She is a human being." Dalton laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "Human being? That is rich. It cannot even walk, Stone. It is useless. I was doing you a favor, leaving it where you could find it. Thought maybe you could use some company up here in your lonely little mountain." One of the other riders sniggered. Caleb's gaze flicked to the man and held until the laughter died. "You have 3 days," Dalton continued, his voice hardening. "You bring her back to town, hand her over proper-like, or I go to the law. Got papers that say I bought her legal. You keeping her makes you a thief." "Those papers are forgeries," Caleb said. "People cannot be bought and sold." Dalton smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "That is where you are wrong, old man. People get bought and sold all the time. Just depends on who is doing the buying and who decides what is legal. And in this case I got documents. You got nothing but a conscience you think makes you better than everyone else." He took another drink and pointed the bottle at Caleb like a weapon. 3 days, he repeated. "After that, I will have the marshal come up here, and we will see what Judge Whitmore thinks about you stealing a man's legally acquired property. And Stone? We both know how that will go. You are just a hermit living alone on a mountain. I am a businessman with friends in town. Who do you think they will believe?" Caleb felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Get off my land." Dalton's smile widened. "Or what? You will shoot me? In front of witnesses? That would make you a murderer. Even you are not that stupid." He remounted his horse with exaggerated care. 3 days, Stone. Clock is ticking." The riders turned and headed back down the mountain, their laughter carrying on the wind. Caleb stood on his porch long after they had disappeared from sight, his hands clenched into fists, his mind working through the limited options available to him. He heard the door open behind him and turned to find Kiona in the doorway, supporting herself against the frame. Her legs would not hold her weight, but she had pulled herself there somehow, had dragged herself to see what was happening. "They will come back," she said. "Not a question. A statement of fact." "Yes," Caleb replied. Kiona's face was pale but determined. "You should let me go, before they hurt you." Caleb crossed to her in 3 long strides and knelt, so his eyes were level with hers. "No," he said firmly. "I made you a promise. I keep my promises." "But they have papers," Kiona whispered. "They have the law." Caleb thought about that, about how law was supposed to protect people, but so often failed to protect those who needed it most, about how justice and legality were not always the same thing. "Then we will fight the law," he said, "and we will win. Because the law might say one thing, but what is right says something else. And in the end, right has to matter more." Kiona searched his face, looking for the lie, for the moment when his resolve would crack. But Caleb's eyes were steady, his jaw set. He meant every word. "How?" she asked simply. "I do not know yet," Caleb admitted. "But I will figure it out. We will figure it out. Together." "Together," Kiona repeated, as if testing the word, as if she could not quite believe it applied to her. that anyone would stand with her rather than against her. Caleb helped her back inside and settled her in the chair by the fire. Then he set about making breakfast, simple fare of eggs and bread, while his mind worked through possibilities. He needed help. He needed someone in town who would stand with them, who would see past Dalton's lies and forgeries. And he knew exactly who that person might be. If the man was willing to listen, if Caleb could convince him that this fight was worth the risk. Marshal Josiah Reed. The wagon rattled along the rutted mountain road toward Pine Ridge, each jolt sending pain through Keona's body despite the careful padding Caleb had arranged. She sat in the back of the wagon, wrapped in blankets, watching the man who had saved her drive with steady hands and a jaw set with determination. They had left the cabin an hour before dawn, before Dalton and his men could return with whatever reinforcements or legal documents they might bring. Caleb had explained the plan the night before, after Dalton's threatening visit. They would go to town. They would find Marshal Josiah Reed. They would tell the truth, and hope that truth still mattered in a world that seemed increasingly willing to look the other way when cruelty was inflicted on those deemed less than human. Keona had wanted to protest, to tell him he should let her go, that she was not worth the trouble he was bringing upon himself. But the words had died in her throat because part of her, a part she had thought long dead, desperately wanted to believe that someone would finally stand up for her, that someone would finally say her life had value. The mountains gave way gradually to rolling hills as they descended. The morning mist clung to the valleys like cotton batting, and the sun rose behind them, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. It would have been beautiful if Keona's stomach was not twisted with fear about what awaited them in town. She had been to settlements before, in the years after her accident, and before her people had abandoned her. She remembered the stares, the whispers, the way mothers pulled their children close as if disability were something contagious. She remembered the pity that felt like acid on her skin, and worse, the contempt that said she was proof that her people were inferior, that her broken body was evidence of some moral failing. "You do not have to be afraid," Caleb said without turning around. His voice carried over the sound of the wagon wheels. "Marshal Reed is a good man. He will help us." Keona wanted to believe him, but 4 years of cruelty had taught her that good men were rare, and that even the good ones often chose the path of least resistance when standing up for what was right became inconvenient. Pine Ridge emerged from the morning mist like a promise that might be broken. The town was larger than Keona had expected, with a main street that boasted a general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, and a modest building with a sign that read, "Marshal's Office." Wooden sidewalks connected the businesses, and hitching posts stood at regular intervals for horses and wagons. As Caleb drove down the main street, activity slowed and then stopped. People turned to stare. A woman sweeping her porch froze mid-motion. 2 men loading supplies onto a wagon abandoned their work to watch. Children playing in the street fell silent. Keona felt their eyes like physical weight. She pulled the blanket more tightly around her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller, less visible, less offensive to their sensibilities. Caleb kept his gaze straight ahead, but Keona saw his hands tighten on the reins. He stopped the wagon in front of the marshal's office and climbed down, then came around to help Keona. She had expected him to lift her, to carry her like a child or an invalid. Instead, he waited, letting her figure out how to maneuver herself to the edge of the wagon bed. "You can do it," he said quietly. "Take your time." It was a small thing, that patience, that assumption of capability rather than helplessness. But it meant everything to Keona. She used her arms to lower herself, and Caleb was there to steady her when her useless legs could not support her weight. Together they made their way to the door of the marshal's office. Inside, the office smelled of coffee and tobacco. A man sat behind a scarred wooden desk, writing in a ledger. He was perhaps in his early 50s, with dark skin that spoke of African heritage and hair that had gone gray at the temples. He wore the star of a federal marshal on his vest, and his eyes, when they lifted to meet theirs, held an intelligence and wariness that Kiona recognized immediately. This was a man who had survived by learning to read people and situations with accuracy. This was a man who knew what it meant to be judged before a single word was spoken. "Caleb Stone," the marshal said, rising from his chair. His voice was deep and measured. "It has been some time." "Marshal Reed," Caleb replied. "I need your help." Reed's gaze moved to Kiona, and she braced herself for the familiar reactions: pity, disgust, dismissal. Instead, she saw something that surprised her: recognition. Not of her specifically, but of what she represented, of what it meant to be someone the world had decided did not matter. "And who is this?" Reed asked. "Her name is Kiona," Caleb said. "I found her tied to my mailbox 3 days ago, left there by Huang Dalton and his men as some kind of cruel joke." Reed's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Sit down, both of you." Caleb helped Kiona into a chair before taking his own seat. Reed remained standing, his posture shifting into something more formal, more official. This was no longer a casual conversation between acquaintances. This was the beginning of something that would have consequences. "Tell me everything," Reed said. Caleb recounted the discovery at the mailbox, the note pinned to Kiona's chest, his decision to take her in and care for her. He described Dalton's visit, the threats, the claim of ownership backed by supposedly legal documents. Throughout the telling, Reed's face remained carefully neutral, but Kiona saw his jaw tighten when Caleb described the rope burns and starvation, the weeks kept in a chicken coop. When Caleb finished, Reed turned to Kiona. "Can you tell me your story, in your own words?" Kiona hesitated. She had learned that her words carried little weight in a world that valued her so poorly. But something in Reed's eyes, something in the way he waited without impatience, encouraged her to try. "My people are Apache," she began, her English halting but determined. "4 years ago I have accident, fall from horse. My legs, they stop working. My people, they think I am cursed. When my mother and father die from sickness, they say it is my fault. They leave me." "Go on," Reed said gently. "White men find me near town. They say I am merchandise. They keep me locked up. They say they will sell me. Then they drink whiskey and decide to," she paused, searching for the word, "to play joke. They tie me to post on Mr. Stone's land. They leave me to die. And Mr. Stone found you." "Yes. He saved me. He is kind. He give me food, medicine, safety." She looked at Caleb, then back at Reed. "He treat me like human being. Not many do this." "He do." Reed nodded slowly, processing everything he had heard. Then he moved to a filing cabinet and pulled out several papers, spreading them on his desk. He studied them for a long moment before speaking. "Huang Dalton is known to us," he said finally. "We have suspected for some time that he is involved in illegal activities. Bootlegging, certainly. Possibly trafficking in stolen goods and," he paused significantly, "in people. But we have not been able to gather sufficient evidence for arrest." "So he gets away with it," Caleb said, his voice tight with frustration. "Not if I can help it," Reed replied. "But you need to understand what we are up against. Dalton has friends in this town, people who profit from his enterprises. And he has a lawyer, Pike Morrison, who is very good at making illegal things look legal on paper." Caleb leaned forward. "So what do we do?" Reed was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming on the desk as he thought. Then he looked at Kiona, and when he spoke it was in a language she had not heard in years. The language of her mother, of her people, of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He spoke in Apache, and his words were careful and precise. "Do not be afraid, daughter of the mountains. I too was once cast out. My mother was Apache. My father was a freed slave. Neither people fully claimed me. But I learned that strength comes not from where we come from, but from who we choose to be." Kiona felt tears spring to her eyes. She had not heard her mother tongue spoken with kindness in so long. She responded in the same language, her voice breaking. "You understand, then, what it is to be unwanted?" "I understand," Reed replied, still an Apache. "And I will help you. Not because the law demands it, though it does, but because it is right." He switched back to English, including Caleb in the conversation once more. "Here is what I know. If Dalton files a complaint, Judge Whitmore will have to hold a hearing. The judge is fair, but he is bound by law. If Dalton has documents that appear legitimate, even if they are forgeries, it will be difficult to prove otherwise without time and investigation." "How much time?" Caleb asked. "More than the 3 days Dalton gave you," Reed said grimly. "But I have an idea. There is a doctor in town, Samuel Hartley. He can examine Kiona and provide medical testimony about her injuries and condition. That will help establish that she was abused, not cared for as property would be by a legitimate owner." Caleb nodded. "That is a start. There is something else," Reed continued. His voice lowered, and he glanced at the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I can testify as well. I can explain that trafficking in human beings is illegal under federal law, regardless of whatever papers Dalton might produce. But," he paused, "this will make me unpopular in certain circles. It may make my job here more difficult." "Then why do it?" Kiona asked quietly. Reed looked at her with eyes that held years of pain and hard-won wisdom. "Because some fights are worth losing friendships over. Some fights are worth risking everything for. And this is one of them." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were undertaking settling over them like a heavy cloak. They were choosing to stand against power and prejudice, against men who had money and connections. They were choosing a path that would be difficult and dangerous, but they were choosing it together. Reed stood and reached for his hat. "I will send word to Doc Hartley. In the meantime, you should not go back to the cabin. Dalton knows where you are, and he will not wait for the law if he thinks he can take Kiona by force. There is a woman in town, Nora McKinnon. She runs a boarding house and," he smiled slightly, "she has never been one to back down from doing what is right. I will ask her to take you in." Caleb rose as well. "I am grateful, Marshal." "Do not thank me yet," Reed replied. "We have not won anything. We have only started the fight." Nora McKinnon's boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure on the edge of town, painted white with green shutters, and surrounded by a well-tended garden. When Reed knocked on the door, it was opened by a woman in her late 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that assessed visitors with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen much of life and was not easily surprised. "Nora," Reed said, "I need a favor." Nora looked past him to Caleb and Kiona in the wagon. Her gaze lingered on Kiona, taking in the blankets, the way the girl held herself, the weariness in her young face. "Well," Nora said, "do not just stand there. Bring her in." The interior of the boarding house was warm and smelled of baking bread and wood polish. The furniture was simple but well maintained, and there were touches of comfort everywhere. Cushions on the chairs, curtains at the windows, a colorful rag rug on the floor. Nora directed them to a room on the first floor, a small space with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out on the garden. She did not ask questions while Caleb helped Kiona settle into the room. She simply brought fresh linens and a pitcher of water and announced that supper would be ready in an hour. After Reed left to make arrangements with Doc Hartley, Caleb sat with Kiona in the small parlor while Nora worked in the kitchen. The sounds and smells of cooking filled the house, domestic and comforting in a way that Kiona had almost forgotten existed. Nora emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray with tea and fresh biscuits. She set it on the low table and poured 3 cups with the practiced ease of someone who had served hundreds of meals to boarders over the years. "So," she said, settling into her chair and fixing Kiona with a direct gaze, "Reed tells me you have had some trouble." Kiona was not sure how to respond. The directness was unexpected, almost refreshing after years of people talking about her as if she were not present. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. "And Caleb here found you and decided to help." "Yes, ma'am." Nora nodded, sipping her tea. "Good for him. Lord knows this town could use more people willing to stand up for what is right instead of what is convenient." "You are not afraid?" Kiona asked. "Of having me here?" Nora laughed, a sound that was surprisingly rich and genuine. "Child, I have buried a husband and a son. I have lived through droughts and floods and more winters than I care to count. I am too old and too stubborn to be afraid of small-minded gossips and bullies like Huang Dalton." She set down her teacup and leaned forward slightly. "My boy died in the war. He was fighting for something he believed in, fighting so that people would be free. I would dishonor his memory if I turned my back on someone who needed help just because it might be inconvenient or unpopular." Kiona felt something loosen in her chest. Here was another person willing to stand with her, another person who saw her as human rather than as a problem to be solved or discarded. "Thank you," Kiona said softly. "No need for thanks," Nora replied briskly. "You are here now, and you are safe. That is what matters." Now she stood and smoothed her apron. "Let me show you where things are. You are welcome to move about as you are able. This is not a prison. It is a home." Over the next hour, Nora proved to be as good as her word. She showed Kiona how to maneuver in the boarding house, where to find things she might need. She did not hover or fuss, did not treat Kiona like a child or an invalid. She simply provided information and then let Kiona make her own decisions about what she could or could not do. When supper was ready, they gathered around a small table in the dining room. The meal was simple: roast chicken, potatoes, green beans from Nora's garden, and the bread whose aroma had been tantalizing Kiona for hours. It was more food than Kiona had seen in one place in weeks, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, to not make herself sick. Nora and Caleb talked quietly about the town, about people Kiona did not know, about the rhythms of life in Pine Ridge. It was ordinary conversation, the kind that happens around tables everywhere, and it made Kiona feel something she had not felt in years. She felt like she belonged. After supper, Nora taught Kiona how to help with the dishes, showing her how she could sit at the sink and wash while Nora dried and put away. It was simple work, but it made Kiona feel useful, feel like she was contributing rather than simply being a burden. "You learn fast," Nora observed. "Your mother taught you well." Kiona felt a lump form in her throat at the mention of her mother. "Yes," she said quietly. "My mother was very patient, teacher." "Tell me about her," Nora invited. And so Kiona did. Haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, she told Nora about her mother, who had been skilled at weaving and herb lore, about her father, who had been a hunter and storyteller, about the life she had known before the accident that changed everything. Nora listened without interruption, giving Kiona the gift of attention, of being truly heard. When the dishes were done and Caleb had retired to his own room upstairs, Nora helped Kiona prepare for bed. As she was about to leave, she paused in the doorway. "Kiona," she said gently, "I know you have been through more than anyone should have to endure. But I want you to know something. You are not defined by what has been done to you. You are defined by how you choose to respond. And from what I have seen today, you are choosing courage." Kiona felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I do not feel courageous." Nora smiled. "Courage is not the absence of fear, child. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You are braver than you know." After Nora left, Kiona lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house settling for the night. Through the thin walls, she could hear Nora moving about upstairs, could hear the distant sound of voices from the saloon down the street, could hear the normal sounds of a town at night. She thought about what Nora had said about courage. She thought about Caleb, who had risked everything to help her. She thought about Marshall Reed, who was willing to make enemies to stand up for what was right. And she thought about herself, about the girl she had been before the accident, and the woman she might yet become. For the first time in 4 years, Kiona allowed herself to hope. The next morning brought Doc Hartley. He arrived at the boarding house mid-morning, carrying a black medical bag and wearing an expression that suggested he was doing this under duress. He was in his 50s, with a carefully trimmed beard and spectacles that gave him an air of authority. But his eyes, when they fell on Kiona, held something that might have been discomfort or distaste. "Marshal Reed sent me," he said to Nora, not bothering with pleasantries. "Said there was a girl here who needed examination." "That is right," Nora said, her tone cooling noticeably. "This is Kiona. She has been through an ordeal." Hartley set down his bag and looked at Kiona properly for the first time. His gaze traveled over her form in a way that was clinical but felt invasive nonetheless. "I see," he said non-committally. Caleb, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. "Doc Hartley," he said, "I am grateful you came." Hartley turned to him. "Caleb Stone, I heard you were involved in this." He paused, then added, "I am not sure what you hope to accomplish. These situations rarely end well." "We are not looking for it to end," Caleb replied evenly. "We are looking for justice." Hartley sighed and picked up his bag. "Let us get this examination done. I have other patients waiting." The examination was thorough and uncomfortable. Hartley checked the rope burns on Kiona's wrists, examined the signs of malnutrition, tested the sensation and movement in her legs. He asked questions in a brisk, professional manner that felt more like an interrogation than a medical consultation. "How long have your legs been paralyzed?" he asked. 4 years, Kiona replied. "And the cause?" "I fall from horse, land on rocks." "My back," she gestured, "break." Hartley made notes in a small leather notebook. "And these rope burns? Recent?" 3 days. "From being restrained?" "Yes. They tie me to post." Hartley looked up from his notes, his expression unreadable. "Why?" Kiona met his gaze steadily. "Because they think I am not human. Because they think they can do what they want with me." The doctor was silent for a long moment. Then he closed his notebook and stood. "I will write a report for Marshal Reed. It will document your injuries and confirm that your paralysis is from trauma, not congenital. Beyond that," he paused, "I cannot say what will happen. This town," he shook his head, "it is not always kind to those who are different." "But you will tell the truth?" Caleb asked. Hartley looked at him. "I will write what I observed. What others choose to do with that information is not my concern." After he left, Nora made tea and the three of them sat in the parlor, processing what had just happened. "He will help," Caleb said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "Maybe," Nora replied. "Sam Hartley is a good doctor, but he is also a cautious man. He has a practice to protect, a reputation to maintain. He will not stick his neck out too far." "Then we find others who will," Caleb said firmly. Over the next 2 days, that is exactly what they did. Caleb and Reed quietly spoke with people around town, looking for anyone who might have witnessed Dalton's activities, anyone who might be willing to testify about what they had seen. It was slow, frustrating work. Most people, when approached, suddenly remembered they had seen nothing, knew nothing, wanted nothing to do with any of it. They had families to protect, businesses to run, reputations to maintain. Getting involved in a fight between Caleb Stone and Huang Dalton was not something they were willing to risk. But there were a few exceptions. Jake, the owner of the saloon where Dalton and his men often drank, admitted he had heard them bragging about their merchandise, about the Apache girls they had acquired. He would not commit to testifying in court, but he said he would tell Reed what he knew privately. A widow named Sarah Thompson said she had seen Dalton's men loading someone who looked like they might be captive into a wagon 3 weeks prior. She was frightened, but when Nora personally asked her, reminding her of the son they had both lost in the war, she agreed she would speak if called upon. And Reverend Ezekiel Thorne, the stern-faced pastor of the town's only church, surprised everyone by coming to the boarding house one evening and asking to speak with Kiona. "I heard about your situation," he said, sitting in Nora's parlor with his hat in his hands. "I must confess, my first reaction was to counsel Caleb to turn you over to the authorities and let them sort it out. I believed that was the safest course, the one least likely to cause trouble." Kiona said nothing, waiting to hear where this was going. "But I have been praying on it," Thorne continued, "and I have been reading Scripture, and I am reminded that Jesus himself said, 'Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me.' He looked at Kiona directly. "You are one of God's children, Miss Kiona, and what has been done to you is an abomination. I want you to know that I will stand with you. I will testify to your character and to the Christian duty we have to protect the vulnerable." Kiona felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you, Reverend." "No thanks needed," Thorne replied. "I am only doing what I should have offered to do from the beginning." During these days of gathering support, Kiona worked with Nora to improve her English. Every evening after supper they sat at the kitchen table with a worn primer that had belonged to Nora's son, and Nora patiently helped Kiona with reading and writing. "You are going to have to speak for yourself soon," Nora explained. "When this goes to court, if it goes to court, you will need to tell your story in your own words. The better your English, the more people will listen." Kiona practiced tirelessly. She read aloud from the primer, stumbling over unfamiliar words. She wrote sentences, her handwriting shaky but determined. She memorized vocabulary and practiced pronunciation until her tongue hurt from the effort of forming sounds that did not come naturally. Caleb helped too in his own way. In the quiet moments he would tell her about the mountains, about the plants and animals that lived there, teaching her the English words for things she knew in Apache. He spoke to her as an equal, not as someone deficient or broken. He asked her opinion on things and listened when she spoke. One afternoon, while Kiona was practicing pronunciation with Nora, she struggled mightily with a particular English word, comfortable. "Comfortable," she repeated slowly, her tongue twisting around the unfamiliar syllables. "Comforta." She sighed in frustration. Why English needs so many sounds for one small word? Caleb, who was mending a saddle strap in the corner of the parlor, looked up. "English," he said with perfect seriousness, "is what happens when you take Latin, add French, steal from German, and then let drunk sailors spell everything wrong for 300 years. Nora laughed so suddenly she nearly dropped her teacup. Kiona's eyes went wide, then a smile slowly spread across her face. "So English is broken language?" Caleb nodded solemnly. "Very broken. We just pretend it makes sense." "Like me," Kiona said, then immediately looked surprised at her own boldness. "I am broken, but I pretend I am comfortable." There was a heartbeat of silence. Then Caleb set down the saddle and looked at her directly. "You are not broken, Kiona. English is broken. You are just learning a broken language, which makes you very brave." But Kiona was not finished. She had discovered something unexpected. Humor could be a weapon against pain. "Or," she said with careful timing, "maybe I am like English. I take from Apache, I add some mountain living, I steal Nora's cooking, and now I am new language nobody understand yet." This time all three of them laughed, and the sound filled the boarding house like sunlight breaking through clouds. Nora wiped her eyes. "Child, that was the wisest thing I have heard in 20 years. "Was good joke?" Kiona asked, pleased with herself. "It was perfect," Caleb said. "And you told it in English. That counts as successful comfortable to me." From that afternoon on, the mood shifted slightly. The fear and tension were still there, hovering over them like a storm cloud, but beneath it they found moments of lightness. Kiona discovered she had a talent for dry observation that translated well into her new language. When Marshal Reed stopped by that evening to update them on his witness interviews, Kiona asked him, in all apparent innocence, "Marshal Reed, if you are half Apache and half African, which half talks to me in Apache language?" Reed, caught mid-sip of coffee, nearly choked. "Both halves," he managed. They agreed it was the smart choice. "So your halves work together," Kiona observed. "That is good. Better than Dalton. All his parts fight each other." Even Reed had to laugh at that. These small moments did not erase the danger they faced or the injustice they were fighting. But they reminded everyone in that boarding house of something important. That joy was an act of resistance. That laughter was a refusal to be defeated. That humor was proof the spirit remained unbroken. And when the night before the trial came, when fear might have swallowed them whole, Kiona found she could still smile, could still make Caleb laugh with a poorly pronounced English word, could still find light in the darkness. because that, she was learning, was what it meant to survive, not just to endure, but to find reasons to keep living even when the world gave you every reason to give up. One evening, as they sat on Nora's porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Kiona asked him something that had been weighing on her mind. "Caleb, why you do this? Really? You risk everything for me. Why?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant peaks. Finally he spoke. 6 years ago, I had a wife and a daughter, Margaret and Emma. They got sick with diphtheria, and I could not save them. I tried everything I knew. I rode through a snowstorm to get the doctor, but it was too late. They died." He paused, and Kiona could see the pain of that memory etched in his face. "Margaret's brother blamed me, said I did not try hard enough, said I let them die. And part of me believed him. Part of me thought maybe if I had been smarter, faster, better, I could have saved them." "I am sorry," Kiona said softly. "For 6 years I lived alone on that mountain," Caleb continued. "I told myself I wanted to be alone, but really I was punishing myself. Thought I did not deserve to have people in my life after I failed the ones I loved most." He turned to look at her then, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. "Then I found you. And I realized something. I could not save Margaret and Emma. That was beyond my power. But I could save you. And maybe, just maybe, that meant I was not completely worthless, that I could still do something that mattered." "You are not worthless," Kiona said firmly. "You are good man, best man I ever know." Caleb smiled, a sad but genuine expression. "And you, Kiona, are stronger than you know. You have survived things that would break most people. You are teaching me what real courage looks like." They sat together in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead. In that moment, Kiona understood that they were saving each other. Caleb was giving her safety and advocacy and a reason to hope. She was giving him purpose and redemption and a reason to rejoin the world of the living. They were not savior and victim. They were two broken people helping each other heal. On the third evening, just as Nora was serving supper, there was a heavy knock on the door. Caleb answered it to find Marshal Reed standing on the porch, his expression grim. "Dalton has filed a formal complaint with Judge Whitmore," Reed said without preamble. "The hearing is set for day after tomorrow, 9 o'clock at the courthouse." "We will be ready," Caleb said. Reed nodded. "I hope so, because Pike Morrison is representing Dalton, and that man could make a saint look like a criminal if it suited his purposes. This is going to be harder than you think." After Reed left, the three of them sat at the table, the meal forgotten as the weight of what was coming settled over them. "I am scared," Kiona admitted. "What if they do not believe me? What if they send me back?" "They will not," Caleb said firmly. "We will not let them." "But how can you stop them?" Kiona pressed. "If judge say I must go, how can you stop?" "We tell the truth," Nora said. "We tell the truth so clearly and so powerfully that they cannot ignore it. And then we trust that there is still enough justice in this world for truth to matter." Kiona wanted to believe her, but she had learned the hard way that justice was often a luxury afforded only to those who had power, money, and the right color skin. She had none of those things. All she had was her voice, and the voices of a few people who had decided she was worth fighting for. She prayed it would be enough. But the night before the hearing, as Kiona lay awake in the darkness wrestling with her fears, she heard something that made her breath catch. A sound she had not heard in 4 years. Someone was singing in Apache. She pulled herself to the window and looked out into Nora's garden, where the moonlight painted everything in shades of silver and shadow. Standing beneath the old oak tree was a figure she did not recognize but somehow knew she should. An old man, perhaps 70 years of age, stood with his face turned toward the stars. His hair was long and silver, braided with leather strips and feathers. He wore traditional Apache clothing, deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the moonlight. In his hands he held a staff carved from dark wood, and at his belt hung a small leather pouch. He was singing a healing song, one that Kiona's mother had sung to her when she was a child and could still run and dance. Kiona made her way downstairs, moving as quietly as she could manage. When she opened the back door, the old man stopped singing and turned to face her. His eyes were dark and deep, holding the wisdom of someone who had walked many paths and learned many truths. "You are Kiona," he said in Apache, "daughter of she who weaves and he who hunts the swift deer." Kiona felt tears spring to her eyes at hearing her parents' names spoken in the old way. "Yes," she whispered. "Who are you?" "I am called Red Sky Walker. I knew your mother when she was young. I taught her some of the herb lore she passed to you." The back door opened again, and Marshal Reed appeared, fully dressed despite the late hour. He had clearly not been sleeping. "Red Sky," he said in Apache, his tone respectful. "I thought you might come." "The spirits speak loudly when injustice is about to be challenged," the old man replied. "How could I not hear them?" Caleb appeared next, followed by Nora wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. They all gathered in the moonlit garden, drawn by something they could not quite name but could definitely feel. Red Sky Walker looked at each of them in turn, then settled his gaze on Kiona. "Tomorrow you will speak before men who do not understand your worth. Tomorrow you will stand in a place built by people who tried to erase your people from this land. Are you afraid?" "Yes," Kiona admitted. "Good," Red Sky said. "Fear means you understand what is at stake. But I have not come to take away your fear. I have come to remind you of something you have forgotten." He gestured for her to sit on the garden bench, and he lowered himself to the ground before her with surprising grace for a man his age. From his pouch he drew out several items: a bundle of dried sage, a single eagle feather that seemed to glow in the moonlight, and a small, smooth stone the color of the brown hills Kiona had been named for. "When you fell from that cliff 4 years ago," Red Sky began, "your people said your spirit left your body. The medicine man declared you empty, cursed, abandoned by the ancestors. Do you know why he said this?" Kiona shook her head, unable to speak. "Because he was afraid. When we cannot heal, we want to believe the fault lies not in our medicine but in the patient. It is easier to call you cursed than to admit we failed you." He lit the sage, and smoke rose between them, sweet and cleansing. "But I am here to tell you what your mother would tell you if she could. Your spirit never left. It only changed. Like a river that finds its path blocked and must carve a new channel. You are not less than you were. You are different. And in that difference lies power that those with working legs will never know." Red Sky picked up the eagle feather and held it so the moonlight caught its edges. "The eagle," he said, "does not apologize for flying high. It does not ask permission from the rabbits below. It simply is what it was meant to be. Tomorrow, when you speak, you must be the eagle, not the rabbit." He placed the feather in her hands. "Your words will matter more than any law these men can write," he continued, "because you will speak truth from a place of survival. You will speak with the voice of every Apache who was silenced, every woman who was treated as property, every person told they had no worth. They will all speak through you." "But what if I am not strong enough?" Kiona whispered. Red Sky picked up the stone and pressed it into her palm alongside the feather. "This stone is from the hills where you were born. Your mother gave it to me before the sickness took her. She said, 'If you ever find my daughter, give her this, and tell her that she carries the mountains inside her.' The mountains do not fear the wind. They stand, and the wind must go around." He placed his weathered hand over hers, closing her fingers around the stone and feather. "You are not broken, Kiona. You are a woman who survived what should have killed her. You are a daughter who honors her mother by continuing to live when others said you should die. You are Apache, and we are the people who endure." Red Sky then stood and began to sing again, this time a different song. Caleb and Nora did not understand the words, but they felt the power in them. Reed, who knew some Apache, bowed his head respectfully. The song spoke of mountains that had stood since the beginning of time, of rivers that carved canyons through solid rock, of trees that grew from stone, of people who bent but did not break. When the song ended, Red Sky placed both hands on Kiona's head and spoke words of blessing in the old language. He called upon the spirits of her mother and father. He called upon the strength of the mountains. He called upon the wisdom of those who had walked before. Then he stepped back and looked at her with eyes that seemed to see not just who she was, but who she would become. "Tomorrow," he said in English so all could hear, "you will show them what it means to be Ishkaine, human being with spirit. You will show them that broken legs do not make a broken person. You will teach them, though they do not know they need teaching." He turned to Caleb. "And you, mountain man, you did not save her. She was saving herself long before you found her. You simply gave her a safe place to finish the work. That is the greater kindness." Caleb nodded, understanding passing between them. Red Sky looked at Reed. "Brother of two bloods," he said, "you have walked between worlds your whole life. Tomorrow you will use that pain for purpose. Your mother would be proud." Reed's eyes glistened, but he said nothing. Finally Red Sky turned to Nora. "Mother of the lost son, you have made your home a fortress against cruelty. Every person you shelter is a victory over those who would break the weak. Your son's sacrifice was not in vain." Nora pressed a hand to her mouth, moved beyond words. Red Sky gathered his things and prepared to leave. "Will you not stay?" Nora asked. "Be there tomorrow to see her victory?" Red Sky shook his head. "My presence would complicate things, make their prejudice easier to justify. No, I will watch from the mountains, as my people have always watched. But I will be there in spirit, as will all who came before." He paused at the garden gate and looked back at Kiona. "Remember, daughter of Brown Hills, they can take your land. They can take your freedom. They can even take your ability to walk. But they cannot take your spirit unless you give it to them." His voice became fierce, powerful. "Do not give it to them." And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows as quietly as he had come. Kiona sat holding the eagle feather and the stone, feeling their weight in her hands. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something new had taken root. Strength. Not the strength of legs that could run, but the strength of a spirit that refused to be broken. Caleb knelt beside her. "How do you feel?" Kiona looked at him with eyes that no longer held quite so much fear. "I feel ready," she said. "I feel like I can face them now." "You were always ready," Nora said softly. "You just needed to remember." That night, Kiona slept with the eagle feather under her pillow and the stone clasped in her hand. And for the first time since her accident, she dreamed not of falling, but of standing on a mountaintop, the wind in her face, her voice carrying across valleys and canyons, strong and clear and impossible to silence. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear, the kind of Kentucky spring day that promised warmth by afternoon but held on to winter's chill in the early hours. Kiona woke before sunrise, her stomach tight with anxiety that made the thought of breakfast impossible. She lay in the small bed in Nora's boarding house, listening to the sounds of the town stirring to life, and wondered if this would be her last morning as a free person. Nora knocked softly and entered with a dress draped over her arm. It was simple but well made, a deep blue cotton that had belonged to her late daughter-in-law. "I thought you might wear this today," Nora said gently. "You want to look like the young woman you are, not like someone's discarded property." Kiona touched the fabric, smooth and clean, so different from the tattered dress she had been wearing when Caleb found her. "Thank you," she whispered. Nora helped her dress, her hands efficient but kind. As she fastened the buttons up Kiona's back, she spoke quietly. "No matter what happens today, you remember this. You are not what they say you are. You are not merchandise or burden or curse. You are a human being with dignity and worth. Do not let anyone make you forget that." "I will try," Kiona said, though her voice trembled. Downstairs, Caleb was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he stared out the window at the mountains in the distance. He looked up when Kiona entered, and something in his expression softened. "You look strong," he said simply. "I do not feel strong." "That is when you need courage most," Caleb replied. "When you do not feel strong but you stand up anyway." They ate a small breakfast that none of them tasted, going through the motions because Nora insisted they would need their strength. Then, at 8:30, Marshal Reed arrived with a wagon. He had positioned cushions and blankets to make the ride as comfortable as possible for Kiona. "The courthouse is going to be crowded," Reed warned as he helped Kiona into the wagon. "Word has spread. Some people are coming because they believe in justice. Others are coming for entertainment. Try not to let the crowd intimidate you." "How can I not?" Kiona asked. "They all think I am nothing." "Then you show them they are wrong," Reed said firmly. He paused, then added in Apache, "You are a daughter of the mountains, Kiona. Mountains do not bow to wind." Kiona felt tears sting her eyes but blinked them back. She would not cry. Not yet. Not when she needed to be strong. The ride through town was even worse than she had imagined. People lined the streets, pointing and whispering. Some faces showed sympathy, but many showed only curiosity or contempt. She heard the words clearly as they passed. Cripple, savage, Indian girl, Dalton's property. Caleb sat beside her in the wagon, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of hostility. He did not tell her to ignore the words. He did not offer false comfort. He simply stayed close, and that was enough. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building at the end of Main Street, imposing and formal with white columns flanking the entrance. A crowd had already gathered on the steps and spilled out into the street. Kiona saw Huang Dalton standing near the door, surrounded by his men. He was dressed in a suit that looked new and expensive, clearly chosen to present an image of respectability. When Dalton saw them approach, a smile spread across his face that made Kiona's skin crawl. "Well, well," he called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The hermit brought his stolen goods. That is almost honest of him." "She is not goods," Caleb said quietly but firmly as he helped Kiona down from the wagon. "She is a person, and her name is Kiona." "Call her what you want," Dalton replied with a shrug. "She is still mine. Got the papers to prove it." "We shall see what the judge says about that," Reed interjected, stepping between Caleb and Dalton before the situation could escalate. Inside, the courtroom was already nearly full. Wooden benches lined both sides of a central aisle that led to a raised platform where Judge Benjamin Whitmore would preside. The judge's bench was imposing, dark oak that spoke of authority and tradition. To one side was a witness stand, a simple chair raised slightly above the floor. 2 tables faced the judge's bench, one for the plaintiff and one for the defendant. Reed guided them to the defendant's table. Kiona noted the irony. Caleb was being treated as the defendant, the accused, when Dalton was the one who had committed crimes. But she was learning that justice and legality were not always aligned. Pike Morrison, Dalton's lawyer, was already seated at the plaintiff's table. He was a man in his late 30s with slicked back hair and a sharp suit that spoke of success and moral flexibility. He shuffled through papers with the confidence of someone who had won many cases and expected to win this one. Nora squeezed into the crowded benches behind them, along with Reverend Thorne and a few other townspeople whose faces Kiona did not recognize. Jake from the saloon was there, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt. Sarah Thompson, the widow, sat near the back, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Benjamin Whitmore," a bailiff announced, and the courtroom came to its feet with a rustling of fabric and creaking of wood. Judge Whitmore entered from a side door. He was a man in his mid-60s with iron-gray hair and a face that suggested he had presided over too many difficult cases and made too many hard decisions. His eyes were sharp and assessing as he took in the crowded courtroom. "Be seated," he said, his voice carrying authority without needing volume. When everyone had settled, Whitmore looked down at the papers before him. "This is a hearing in the matter of Huang Dalton versus Caleb Stone, regarding disputed ownership of one Apache female." He paused, and something in his expression suggested distaste for the very phrase he had just spoken. "Mr. Morrison, You may present your case." Pike Morrison rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket as he approached the judge's bench. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of theft. My client, Mr. Dalton, legally purchased a young Apache woman from a trader named Jeremiah Black 3 weeks ago. He has documentation proving this transaction." Morrison produced papers with a flourish, handing them to the bailiff who passed them to the judge. "The purchase was made in good faith," Morrison continued. "Mr. Dalton intended to provide the woman with employment as a domestic servant. However, before he could transport her to her place of employment, Mr. Stone unlawfully took possession of her. We are here simply to recover Mr. Dalton's rightful property and to seek damages for Mr. Stone's theft." Whitmore examined the papers, his face unreadable. "Mr. Reed, you are representing the defendant?" "I am, Your Honor," Reed said, standing. "And I would like to note for the record that the alleged purchase documents are forgeries. More importantly, the buying and selling of human beings is illegal under federal law. This entire proceeding is based on a false premise." "That is for the court to determine," Whitmore replied. "Do you have evidence that the documents are forgeries?" "I have evidence that no trader named Jeremiah Black exists in any official records," Reed said. "And I have evidence that the woman in question, whose name is Keona Whitefeather, was held against her will, starved, and ultimately abandoned in a manner that suggests she was never considered an employee but rather a captive." "Inflammatory language, Your Honor," Morrison objected. "My client's methods of transportation and temporary housing may have been unconventional, but that does not negate his legal ownership." Whitmore held up a hand for silence. "I will hear testimony and then make my determination. Mr. Morrison, call your first witness." Dalton took the stand, placing his hand on the Bible and swearing to tell the truth. He sat with an air of injured dignity, playing the role of wronged businessman with practiced ease. Under Morrison's questioning, Dalton told a story that bore little resemblance to reality. He claimed he had purchased Keona from a traveling trader who specialized in placing displaced Indians in domestic service positions. He said he had paid good money, $150, and had every intention of providing her with fair wages and decent treatment once she reached her destination in Tennessee. "Then why," Morrison asked, "did you not simply take her directly to Tennessee? Why keep her in Mr. Stone's area?" Dalton looked appropriately regretful. "We had some business to conclude in Pine Ridge first, supplies to purchase. I intended to collect her and continue our journey within a few days. But before I could do so, Mr. Stone took her." "And how did Mr. Stone come to have possession of her?" Dalton hesitated, and Keona could see him calculating how much truth he could safely admit. We had left her in a secure location while we concluded our business in town. Mr. Stone must have found her there and decided to," he paused, "to take her for himself." "You left her tied to a mailbox," Reed said, standing up, "in the cold, with a note that said she was a gift. That is what your secure location was." "Objection," Morrison said sharply. "Marshal Reed is not questioning the witness." "Sustained," Whitmore said. "Marshal, you will have your chance to cross-examine." When it was Reed's turn to question Dalton, the careful facade began to crack. Reed approached slowly, his questions measured and precise. "Mr. Dalton, you say you purchased Keona from a trader named Jeremiah Black. Can you describe this man?" Dalton shifted in his seat. "He was, average height, brown hair. He wore a hat." "And where did this transaction take place?" "Outside of town, on the road." "Convenient," Reed observed. "No witnesses, no specific location. Tell me, Mr. Dalton, do you often conduct business transactions worth $150 on the side of the road with no witnesses?" Dalton faltered. "He was passing through. It was an opportunity." "And this Jeremiah Black, did he provide any documentation about where he acquired Keona? Any proof that she consented to being sold into service?" "She is Apache," Dalton said, his frustration showing. "They do not have the same concept of consent that we do." Reed let that statement hang in the air for a moment, allowing the courtroom to absorb its implications. So you are saying that it is acceptable to buy and sell Apache people without their consent because they are, what, less than human? Objection, Morrison said. Marshal Reed is putting words in my client's mouth. I am simply asking for clarification, Reed replied calmly. Whitmore considered. I will allow the question. Mr. Dalton, please answer. Dalton looked trapped. I did not say less than human. I just meant they have different ways. They do not always understand our laws. But you understand our laws, Reed continued. And you understand that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. You understand that buying and selling human beings is illegal. Yet you claim you did exactly that. It was not slavery, Dalton protested. It was employment. Employment that she could not refuse or leave. Employment where she was kept in a chicken coop and fed once a day. Employment that ended with her being tied to a post and abandoned? Objection. Morrison was on his feet. These are unsubstantiated allegations. I have medical testimony to support every one of those allegations, Reed said, and I have the testimony of the victim herself. Whitmore banged his gavel. Enough. Mr. Dalton, you may step down. Marshal Reed, call your first witness. Reed called Doc Hartley. The doctor approached the stand with obvious reluctance, but once sworn in, he was forced to tell the truth as he had observed it. I examined Miss Whitefeather 2 days ago, Hartley said, reading from his notes. She showed signs of malnutrition, dehydration, and recent trauma. She had rope burns on both wrists consistent with having been bound tightly for an extended period. She had bruising on her shoulders and torso. Her condition was not consistent with someone who had been well cared for. And her paralysis? Reed asked. The result of spinal trauma, likely from a fall, approximately 4 years ago. It is permanent and was not caused by any recent injury or congenital defect. Morrison declined to cross-examine, perhaps recognizing that questioning the doctor's findings would only reinforce them. Reed then called Sarah Thompson. The widow was nervous, her hands shaking as she placed them on the Bible, but she held firm. Mrs. Thompson, did you see Mr. Dalton or any of his associates with Keona Whitefeather before the date Mr. Stone found her? Yes, Sarah said quietly. About 3 weeks ago I saw them loading someone into a wagon. It was a young woman. She looked frightened. She was not walking. They were carrying her. Did she appear to be there voluntarily? Sarah shook her head. She was struggling, trying to pull away. One of the men, he laughed about it, said she would fetch a good price at the freak show in Tennessee. Morrison jumped up. Hearsay, Your Honor. This witness cannot testify to what someone else said. She can testify to what she heard, Reed countered, and it goes directly to Mr. Dalton's intent and treatment of Keona. Whitmore nodded. I will allow it. Continue, Mrs. Thompson. Sarah told what she knew, which was not much, but was damning nonetheless. When Morrison tried to shake her testimony by suggesting she might be mistaken about dates or identities, she held firm. I know what I saw, she insisted, and I know the difference between someone being helped and someone being hurt. Jake from the saloon testified next, admitting under oath that he had heard Dalton and his men bragging about their Apache merchandise and their plans to sell her for exhibition. His testimony was reluctant but honest, and Morrison could not shake it. Finally, Reed stood and called his last witness, the one that mattered most. The court calls Keona Whitefeather. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to Keona as Caleb helped her stand and then, step by careful step, supported herself on the cane he had carved for her, made her way to the witness stand. It was only 20 feet, but it felt like miles. Her legs trembled with the effort of bearing even partial weight. Her hands gripped the cane until her knuckles turned white, but she made it. She climbed the 2 steps to the witness stand and sat in the chair, facing the judge, facing the courtroom, facing Dalton. The bailiff approached with the Bible. Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do, Keona said. Her voice was quiet but clear. Reed approached her gently. Keona, will you tell the court your full name? My name is Keona Whitefeather. And how old are you? 17 years? Where were you born? In Apache territory. My people move with seasons. I was born near Brown Hills in Arizona. Tell the court about your family. Kiona took a breath. My father was hunter. My mother was weaver. She make beautiful blankets. She teach me herbs and healing. My father teach me to ride horses and tell stories. What happened to them? They die. Sickness come through our camp. Many people die. My parents both die within 3 days of each other. This happened 3 years ago. And before they died, something happened to you. Can you tell the court about that? Kiona's hands tightened on her lap. 4 years ago, I am riding my horse. Very good rider. Fast and strong. But snakes scare my horse. Horse rear up. I fall from cliff. I land on rocks. My back break. My legs, she gestured, they stop working. What did your people do? Kiona felt tears threaten but pushed them back. Medicine man try to help. He use all his knowledge. But my spine is broken. He say my spirit has left my body. He say I am empty shell. When my parents die after this, people say I am curse. They say I bring bad luck to camp. They say I must leave. And did you leave? Kiona nodded. They take me near town. They leave me with some food and water. They say, may the spirits protect me. But I know they do not believe spirits will protect curse. What happened then? I try to survive. I beg for food. Some people kind, some people not kind. Then, her voice dropped, men find me. White men. They say I can work for them. I think maybe they will help me, but they do not help. Tell the court what they did, Reed said gently. Kiona looked directly at Dalton as she spoke. They put me in chicken coop behind building in town. They give me food once a day. Sometimes they forget. Water is dirty. I cannot wash. I cannot move around. I am there for, she paused, calculating, maybe 3 weeks, maybe more. Hard to know. What did they say to you during this time? She swallowed hard. They say I am merchandise. They say I will be sold to man in Tennessee who has freak show. They say people will pay to see crippled Indian girl. They laugh about this. They think is funny. And then what happened? One night, they drink very much whiskey. They are very drunk. They think of idea. They say, let us give her to Hermit on Mountain. Let us see what he does with broken Indian. They think this is very funny joke. They tie me up. They drive wagon to Mailbox at edge of Mr. Stone's land. They tie me to post. They pin note to my chest. Then they leave me. How long were you there? I do not know. Maybe all night. Maybe into morning. I am very cold. I think maybe I will die. I think maybe that is better. Then Mr. Stone come. Tell the court what Mr. Stone did. Kiona felt her voice waver with emotion. He cut the ropes. He did not hurt me. He speak soft. He say I am safe. He carry me to his home. He wash my wounds. He give me food and water. He give me bed and blankets. He treat me like human being. First time in long time someone treat me like this. She paused, gathering her courage for what came next. She turned to face Judge Whitmore directly. Your Honor, my English is not perfect. But I know enough to say this. I am not property. I was never Mr. Dalton's property. He did not buy me. He stole me. He kept me like animal. He planned to sell me like animal. Mr. Stone did not steal me. He rescued me. Her voice grew stronger. In my language we have word, ishkaine. It means, she thought for a moment, human being with spirit. Mr. Dalton, he treat me like I have no spirit, like I am thing, not person. But Mr. Stone, he treat me like ishkaine, like I have value, like my life matters. Kiona looked around the courtroom. I know many people here think I am nothing because I am Apache and because my legs do not work. They think I am curse or joke. But I am not these things. I am daughter of mountains. I am healer. I am person who survived when everyone say I should die. And I choose to stay with man who sees this. I choose to stay with Mr. Stone, not because he owns me, because he treats me like family. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Several people in the audience were wiping their eyes. Even Judge Whitmore had removed his spectacles and was cleaning them. though his eyes looked suspiciously bright. Morrison stood for cross-examination, but his usual sharp confidence was muted. "Miss Whitefeather, is it true that you have nowhere else to go? That without Mr. Stone or Mr. Dalton you would be destitute?" "This is true," Kiona admitted. "So really, you are simply choosing the better of two options. You are dependent on someone's charity. Does it matter whose?" Kiona met his eyes steadily. "Yes, it matters. One man treats me like human. Other man treats me like animal. You ask if this matters. I think you know it matters very much." Morrison tried a few more questions, attempting to suggest that Kiona might be confused or mistaken about what had happened. But each time she answered clearly and calmly, her testimony unshakable because it was simply the truth. Finally, Morrison sat down, and Kiona was allowed to step down from the witness stand. The walk back to the defendant's table was easier than the walk up had been, as if having spoken her truth had somehow made her stronger. Whitmore called for a brief recess while he reviewed the testimonies and evidence. The courtroom emptied into the hallway where people clustered in small groups, whispering and speculating. Nora brought Kiona water and squeezed her hand. "You were magnificent," she whispered. "Absolutely magnificent." "You think Judge will believe me?" Kiona asked. "How could he not?" Nora replied. "You spoke from the heart. You spoke the truth. That has to count for something." But as the minutes ticked by, Kiona's anxiety grew. She had learned that truth did not always triumph, that sometimes people heard what they wanted to hear rather than what was actually said. When they were called back into the courtroom, Kiona felt Caleb take her hand and squeeze it gently. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "we are in this together." Judge Whitmore returned to his bench and surveyed the courtroom. The room fell silent, every person holding their breath waiting for his decision. "I have reviewed all the testimony and evidence presented today," Whitmore began. "This is a complex case that touches on some of the most fundamental questions of human dignity and legal rights." He paused, looking directly at Dalton. "Mr. Dalton, you have presented documents purporting to show that you purchased Kiona Whitefeather. However, these documents are signed by a person who cannot be verified to exist. More importantly, even if this Jeremiah Black were real, the transaction itself would be illegal. The buying and selling of human beings is prohibited by federal law. No amount of paperwork can make slavery legal, regardless of how it is disguised." Morrison started to object, but Whitmore held up his hand. "I am not finished. The testimony of multiple witnesses, including medical evidence from Dr. Hartley, clearly shows that Miss Whitefeather was held against her will, subjected to inhumane conditions, and ultimately abandoned in a manner that endangered her life. These are not the actions of a legitimate employer. These are the actions of criminals engaged in human trafficking." Dalton's face had gone pale. "Furthermore," Whitmore continued, "Miss Whitefeather's own testimony was credible, compelling, and deeply moving. She is clearly a young woman of intelligence and character who has survived circumstances that would destroy most people. To suggest that she is property rather than a person with full human rights is not only legally wrong, but morally reprehensible." The judge looked at the papers before him one more time, then announced his ruling. "It is the judgment of this court that Kiona Whitefeather is a free person who was never legitimately owned by Mr. Dalton. Mr. Stone's actions in rescuing her were therefore not theft, but rather a humanitarian act that likely saved her life. The charges against Mr. Stone are dismissed." A murmur ran through the courtroom, growing into scattered applause. Kiona felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in years, they were tears of relief rather than despair. But Whitmore was not done. "Furthermore, I am directing Marshal Reed to file charges against Mr. Dalton and his associates for human trafficking, kidnapping, and assault. Bailiff, take Mr. Dalton into custody." "No!" Dalton shouted, jumping to his feet. "This is not right. She is just an Indian. She does not deserve—" "You will be silent," Whitmore said, his voice like iron, "or I will add contempt of court to your charges." As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Dalton's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. He turned to Caleb with an expression of pure hatred. This is your fault. You took everything from me. First my sister, now this. You have destroyed my life." Caleb stood and faced his brother-in-law directly. "No, Huang, I did not take your sister from you. Sickness did, and I did not destroy your life. You did that yourself when you chose cruelty over compassion, when you chose to see another human being as merchandise rather than as someone's daughter." He paused, then added more gently, "Margaret would be ashamed of what you have become. She would want you to be better than this." Dalton sagged as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. He looked suddenly smaller, deflated, as if hatred had been the only thing holding him upright, and now it was gone. As the bailiff led him away, he did not resist. He simply walked, head down, toward whatever consequences awaited him. Whitmore addressed the courtroom one final time. "As for guardianship of Miss Whitefeather, if she is agreeable, I am granting full legal guardianship to Mr. Caleb Stone with the understanding that she is free to leave this arrangement at any time should she choose." The judge looked at Kiona. "Miss Whitefeather, do you consent to this arrangement?" Kiona stood, using her cane for support, but standing nonetheless. "Yes, Your Honor. I consent. Mr. Stone is good man." "He is—" She paused, searching for the right word in English, then found it. "He is family." Whitmore smiled, the first genuine smile he had shown all day. "Then it is so ordered. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell, and suddenly the courtroom erupted in sound. People surged forward to congratulate them. Nora was crying and laughing at the same time, hugging Kiona and Caleb both. Reverend Thorne shook Caleb's hand vigorously. Even Jake from the saloon came over to offer his respects. Marshal Reed approached with a satisfied expression. "That," he said, "is what justice looks like. It does not happen often enough, but when it does, it is worth every difficulty." "Thank you," Caleb said, shaking his hand. "We could not have done this without you." Reed turned to Kiona and spoke in Apache. "You spoke well, daughter. Your mother would be proud." Kiona felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she replied in the same language, "for everything." As they made their way out of the courthouse, Kiona noticed that the faces in the crowd had changed. There was still curiosity, but the contempt had largely vanished, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. Several people nodded to her as she passed. One woman even smiled. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm and bright. Spring had truly arrived while they had been inside, as if the world itself was celebrating their victory. They returned to Nora's boarding house for a celebration meal. Nora had prepared a feast: roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from her garden, and apple pie for dessert. Others joined them, the supporters who had stood with them throughout the ordeal. There was laughter and storytelling and a sense of community that Kiona had not felt since before her accident. As the evening wore on and guests began to depart, Kiona found herself on the porch with Caleb, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Caleb said, "we go home, back to the cabin. Unless," he added, "you would prefer to stay here in town. You have that choice now." Kiona considered. She had grown fond of Nora and the boarding house, but when she thought about home, she pictured the cabin on the mountain, surrounded by pine trees, with the sound of wind in the branches and the sight of peaks against the sky. "I want to go to mountain," she said. "With you. If that is acceptable." Caleb smiled. "That is more than acceptable. That is exactly what I hoped you would say." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Kiona asked another question. "Caleb, why you think Judge ruled for us?" "Really?" Caleb thought about it. "I think because you showed him the truth. Not just facts, but truth. You showed him that you are a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams. You made it impossible for him to see you as property. That is powerful, Kiona. More powerful than any law. In my language," Kiona said, "we say, da yiniligi. It means," she paused, "the truth that cannot be broken." Like mountain. Wind blows, rain falls, but mountain remains. That is beautiful, Caleb said. You are like mountain, Kiona continued. You stand firm when others would bend. You protect when others would ignore. She looked at him seriously. I am grateful for you. Not just because you saved my life. Because you give me life back. You show me I still have worth. Caleb's eyes were bright with emotion. You always had worth, Kiona. You just needed people around you who could see it. 6 months passed, and winter returned to the mountains. But this winter was different from all the winters before, because the cabin on the mountain was no longer a place of solitude and grief. It was a home. Kiona had grown stronger in the months since the trial. She could walk short distances with her cane now, and while her legs would never fully recover, she had learned to navigate her limitations with grace and determination. She had also become an integral part of the community in ways she never could have imagined. She taught children in town about herbs and healing, sharing the knowledge her mother had passed down to her. She worked with Nora to establish a small school where Apache and white children learned together, studying both cultures and languages. She wrote letters to her people through Red Sky Walker, who had appeared one day at the cabin, an old medicine man who remembered her mother and had come to offer his blessing. Red Sky had performed a ceremony speaking words in Apache that acknowledged Kiona's journey and honored her strength. You have 2 homes now, he had told her, one in the land of your birth and one in the land of your choosing. Both are valid. Both are sacred. Caleb had also changed. The shadows that had haunted him for 6 years had begun to lift. He smiled more easily now. He spoke more freely. He had reconnected with the community he had isolated himself from, attending church services and town meetings, contributing his skills and knowledge to the betterment of Pine Ridge. But the most significant change was the one that existed between them. They had become family in the truest sense, not bound by blood or legal obligation, but by choice and love and mutual respect. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire in the cabin, surrounded by the small decorations Nora had helped them make. Kiona was teaching Caleb a song in Apache, laughing at his pronunciation while he good-naturedly stumbled through the unfamiliar syllables. I have something for you, Caleb said when the song ended. He pulled a small package from behind his chair and handed it to her. Kiona unwrapped it carefully to find a book, leather-bound and beautiful. The title was embossed in gold, Apache Legends and Tales. I know you miss the stories, Caleb said. I thought maybe this would help, and maybe you could teach me. Share your culture with me the way you have been sharing it with the children. Kiona held the book like the treasure it was. This is, she struggled for words, this is most thoughtful gift. Thank you, Father. It was the first time she had called him that. Father. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb's voice was thick with emotion when he replied, You honor me, daughter. They sat together in the warm glow of the fire, the mountains standing guard outside, and Kiona thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain and loss, the cruelty and kindness, the despair and hope. She thought about the mailbox where her new life had begun, where she had been left to die but where she had instead been found. 2 weeks after the trial, on the first truly warm day of spring, Caleb had hitched Copper to the wagon and helped Kiona climb aboard. Where are we going? She had asked. You will see, was all he would say. They had ridden in comfortable silence through the mountain roads, watching the world come alive with new growth. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and birds sang from every branch. Spring had come late that year, but when it arrived with abundance. When they reached the old wooden mailbox at the edge of Caleb's property, Kiona had felt her breath catch. She had not been back to this place since the morning he had cut her free. Part of her had not wanted to return, had wanted to leave that terrible memory buried and forgotten. But Caleb had different ideas. He helped her down from the wagon and stood beside her, both of them looking at the weathered post that had witnessed both cruelty and rescue. This place, Caleb said quietly, could remain a monument to what was done to you, a reminder of pain. Or, he reached into the wagon and pulled out a cloth bundle. We could make it something else. He unwrapped the bundle to reveal a hammer, a chisel, and a small bag of wildflower seeds. Kiona understood immediately. We change its meaning. Caleb nodded. We reclaim it. They had worked together in the warm sunshine. Caleb held the chisel while Kiona guided his hand, choosing each letter with care. The wood was old and hard, and it took time to carve deeply enough that the words would last. But they were patient, and they worked as a team, the way they had learned to do everything. When they finished, the mailbox bore new words carved into its surface, the letters deep and clear. Where cruelty ended, family began. Kiona ran her fingers over the carved letters, feeling the rough wood beneath her palm. She whispered a prayer in Apache, thanking the spirits for bringing her through darkness into light, for guiding her to this man who had seen her humanity when others saw only damaged goods. Then they planted the wildflower seeds around the base of the post, mountain flowers that would bloom brown and gold like the hills of her name. Caleb brought water from a nearby stream, and they soaked the earth, giving the seeds the best chance to take root. This is not a grave marker, Caleb had said as they worked. This is a birth marker. This is where our family was born. Kiona had looked up at him, this big, rough mountain man with his calloused hands and his gentle heart, and she had felt something settle into place inside her chest. Yes, she had agreed. This is where I was reborn. Before they left, Caleb had done one more thing. He had taken the rusted nail that had pinned the cruel note to her chest, the nail he had kept all these months, and he had driven it into the post beneath the carved words, a reminder of what had been, transformed into a promise of what would be. Now, sitting by the Christmas fire 6 months later, Kiona could close her eyes and see those flowers blooming, could feel the solid weight of that mailbox, transformed from a symbol of hate into a monument of hope. She thought about Dalton, serving his sentence in the territorial prison, and hoped that somewhere in his punishment he would find redemption and healing. She thought about her mother and father, gone but not forgotten, and hoped they could see her now, could see that she had found a way to honor their teachings even in this strange new life. And she thought about herself, about Kiona Whitefeather, who had been told she was worthless and cursed and broken, but who had learned that none of those things defined her. She was defined by her courage, by her resilience, by her capacity to hope even when hope seemed foolish. "Caleb," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yes? Do you remember when you first find me? When you ask why I not just die? Why I still trying to live? I remember. I did not have good answer then. But I think I have answer now." "What is it?" Kiona smiled. "I think part of me knew, even when everything was dark, even when I wanted to give up, part of me knew that somewhere there was person like you. Somewhere there was place like this. Somewhere there was family waiting. I just had to survive long enough to find it." She paused, then added, "Or maybe for it to find me." Caleb reached over and took her hand. "I am glad you survived. I am glad we found each other. You have given me my life back too, you know. You reminded me that living alone is not the same as living, that protecting yourself from pain also means missing out on joy." Outside, snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting down from a sky full of stars. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnessing this small moment of grace in a cabin on their slopes. Kiona and Caleb sat by the fire, father and daughter not by birth but by choice, and they were content. The past could not be changed, and the future was uncertain. But this moment, this warm, peaceful, loving moment, was theirs. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Years later, when Kiona was a grown woman with her own school and her own students, when she had become a bridge between two cultures and a voice for those who had been silenced, she would sometimes tell the story of the mailbox. She would tell it to children who felt worthless, to people who felt hopeless, to anyone who needed to hear that their story was not over. She would tell them about being tied to a post and left to die, about being found by a man who saw her humanity when others saw only damaged goods, about standing in a courtroom and speaking her truth, about finding family in the most unexpected place. And she would end by saying, "You are not defined by what has been done to you. You are not defined by what others say you are. You are defined by how you choose to respond, by who you choose to become, by what you choose to build from the rubble of your pain." Your story is not over. Sometimes the ending you thought was coming is really just the beginning of something better. Sometimes the moment you think you are dying is actually the moment you start to truly live. She would look at her students with those amber eyes that had seen so much and yet still held such kindness and say, "Never give up. Your mountain is out there. Your family is out there. Your home is out there. You just have to survive long enough to find it." And they would believe her. Because Kiona Whitefeather, daughter of Brown Hills, daughter of Caleb Stone, daughter of mountains, had lived it. And if she could survive and thrive, then perhaps they could too. The story of the mailbox became a legend in Pine Ridge, passed down through generations. A reminder that cruelty does not have to win, that one person standing up for what is right can change everything. That family is not always the one you are born into, but sometimes the one you choose, and that chooses you. And high on the mountain, the cabin still stands. The mailbox still stands too, its carved message weathered but still legible, surrounded each spring by wildflowers that bloom in shades of brown and gold. A monument not to what was lost, but to what was found. And hope, as it turned out, was just the beginning.